At 85 years old, Toni Tennille, the golden-voiced half of the legendary duo Captain and Tennille, has finally decided to open up about the truth behind her marriages and the struggles she kept hidden from the public for decades. For many people, Toni was the picture of happiness, a radiant performer known for her big smile, graceful charm, and songs that defined the 1970s, especially the unforgettable hit Love Will Keep Us Together. But behind the bright lights, applause, and success, Toni lived a very different reality. Her life, once seen as a fairy tale, was filled with emotional pain, loneliness, and quiet sacrifices that few ever knew. For years, she stayed silent about what really happened in her relationships, especially with her famous husband and musical partner, Daryl. Now, with time and reflection, Toni has chosen to share her story, not out of bitterness, but to help others understand that even love can exist alongside heartbreak, and that sometimes walking away is the only way to save yourself. Born on May 8, 1940, in Montgomery, Alabama, Toni Tennille grew up surrounded by music, creativity, and ambition. Her father, Frank Tennille, owned a furniture store but once sang with Bob Crosby's Bobcats, a sign that performance and rhythm ran in his blood. Her mother, Catherine, was equally impressive, hosting her own television program in Montgomery, a rare thing for women in that time. As the oldest of 4 sisters, Toni was raised in a household where dreams were encouraged and art was celebrated. She attended Sidney Lanier High School and later studied classical piano at Auburn University. There she performed with the Auburn Knights Big Band, showing early signs of her natural stage presence and musical gift. But in 1959, her life changed dramatically when her father's business failed, forcing the family to leave Alabama and move to California. Suddenly, Toni went from college life to working as a file clerk and analyst, yet her love for music never faded. Even in those quiet early years, the stage was calling her, and destiny had bigger plans than she could have ever imagined. Before fame came knocking, Toni Tennille lived through a lesser-known chapter of her life, her first marriage. In the early 1960s, she married Kenneth Shearer while still chasing her musical dreams. The marriage was modest and quiet, with no public attention or drama. At that time, Toni was still working hard behind the scenes, learning, performing, and slowly building her confidence as an artist. But despite their efforts, the relationship didn't last. By 1972, after nearly a decade, they divorced. Toni would later reflect on this marriage without anger or regret. It wasn't filled with betrayal or fights. It simply lacked the deep emotional and creative connection she craved. That relationship, while not painful, didn't fulfill her heart. In a way, it was an early lesson about love, showing her what she truly needed from a partner. That quiet ending also set the stage for something extraordinary, a meeting that would change her career and her life forever. Because just a few years later, she would meet Daryl, the man who would become both her musical partner and her greatest emotional challenge. Toni's rise to fame was almost like a dream come true. While working on a rock musical in Los Angeles, she met Daryl, a talented keyboardist who had once toured with the Beach Boys. Daryl was reserved and mysterious, the opposite of Toni's open, warm personality, but the two immediately shared a strong creative bond. Their chemistry on stage was undeniable. Together they formed Captain and Tennille, a duo that would soon become one of the most popular acts of the 1970s. In 1975, their song Love Will Keep Us Together became a global sensation, hitting #1 on the charts and earning them a Grammy Award. Overnight, Toni and Daryl became symbols of love, harmony, and musical joy. They even had their own television variety show, where fans saw them laughing, singing, and appearing deeply in love. To the public, they seemed like the perfect couple. But behind that glamorous image, their relationship was much more complicated than anyone could imagine. As Toni would later admit, "People saw us as this happy, loving couple, and I went along with it because that was the act." In private, Toni's life was far from the joyful image fans adored. Daryl, though talented and kind in many ways, was also deeply private, emotionally distant, and often withdrawn. Toni would later describe him as a good man who just couldn't share his emotions. Their life together became increasingly difficult as the years went by. Daryl managed all their finances and often made decisions without including Toni. He avoided arguments and emotional talks, leaving her feeling unheard and unseen. Despite the distance, Toni kept trying to make things work. She performed beside him, smiling for the cameras while feeling a growing loneliness inside. To the world, she was a symbol of love and happiness, but in truth, she was trapped in silence, constantly giving more than she received. She once wrote, I was lying next to a man who would not or could not return my love. That one sentence perfectly captures her pain, a deep sorrow hidden beneath the surface of fame and success. Toni stayed in the marriage for nearly 40 years, believing that love and loyalty meant endurance. But eventually, even her strength began to fade under the weight of unspoken sadness. By 2014, Toni Tennille had reached a breaking point. After years of emotional distance, she finally realized that staying in the marriage meant losing herself. With quiet courage, she filed for divorce, ending a partnership that had lasted almost 4 decades. "I knew I had to leave, not to hurt him, but to save myself," she said later. It wasn't anger or revenge that drove her decision. It was survival. Still, even after the divorce, Toni didn't stop caring for Daryl. When he began to suffer from Parkinson's disease, she stepped in once again, arranging for his care and visiting him regularly. She moved him closer to her home in Arizona, making sure he had everything he needed. Despite their separation, her loyalty never wavered. "I wasn't going to abandon him," she explained. "I just couldn't stay married to him anymore." Their love story had transformed into something bittersweet, a deep, lasting connection that survived even after marriage ended. When Daryl passed away in 2019, Toni was at his side, holding his hand as he took his final breath. She grieved deeply, but also understood that she had made the right choice years earlier. Her story shows that, in 2016, Toni Tennille decided it was time to tell her story her own way. She released her memoir, Toni Tennille, a memoir where she opened up about the private pain she had endured during her marriage and the years of silence that followed. The book was not written to shame or accuse Daryl Dragon, but to finally bring honesty and healing to her own life. "I wanted people to understand that you can love someone and still leave them," she explained. Her memoir revealed the emotional cost of a marriage that looked perfect from the outside, but was empty on the inside. Readers were touched by her honesty. There was no bitterness, just reflection, sadness, and strength. Through her words, Toni reminded the world that no one's life is as perfect as it seems. Even those who appear happy can carry unseen struggles. Her decision to speak out so openly inspired many, especially women who had faced similar emotional battles in silence. It was a brave act, one that showed that self-preservation and love can coexist. Toni's courage to break her silence turned her story from one of sadness into one of strength, resilience, and truth. Today, Toni Tennille's legacy is far more than her songs. Yes, her hits, "Love Will Keep Us Together," "Muskrat Love," "Do That to Me," "One More Time," still bring joy to millions of fans around the world. Her warm voice, heartfelt performances, and kind personality made her one of the most beloved figures in American pop music. But her real legacy lies in her honesty and courage. Even after decades in the spotlight, she has remained humble, graceful, and open about her past. In her later years, she continues to live quietly in Prescott, Arizona, occasionally performing and mentoring younger artists. Her story reminds us that real success isn't just about awards or fame. It's about finding peace, staying true to yourself, and having the strength to move forward even after heartbreak. Toni Tennille's life, with all its highs and lows, proves that love, even when imperfect, can teach us powerful lessons about strength, compassion, and forgiveness. And at 85, by finally breaking her silence, Toni has given her fans something even more lasting than her music: the courage to speak their truth, and the reminder that it's never too late to reclaim your happiness. After leaving her long and complicated marriage, Toni Tennille stepped into a new chapter of her life, one filled with quiet reflection, creativity, and self-rediscovery. For decades, her identity had been tied to the duo Captain and Tennille and the public image of a perfect love story. But for the first time in her adult life, Toni was free to simply be herself. Living in Prescott, Arizona, she embraced a slower, simpler routine far away from the fast-paced world of fame. She began reconnecting with friends, community members, and even fans who reached out to express support after reading her memoir. Music, of course, remained her greatest comfort. She performed occasionally at small venues, not for money or publicity, but for the pure love of singing. In these intimate settings, Toni rediscovered the joy of performing without pressure or expectation. She often spoke about how liberating it felt to perform songs that truly reflected her own emotions. Her later performances carried a deeper maturity. Her voice, though gentler with age, carried more emotion than ever. For Toni, music was not just a career, it was a form of healing, a way to reconnect with her truest self after years of silence. When Toni Tennille decided to tell her story in her memoir, She knew it might surprise or even shock some fans who had believed in the fairy tale image of Captain Tennille. But what happened instead was something beautiful. People from all walks of life thanked her for being honest. Letters and messages poured in from women and men who had experienced emotional distance in their relationships and were moved by her courage to speak openly. Toni's vulnerability allowed others to see that emotional neglect can be just as painful as any other form of heartbreak. Her honesty gave permission for others to face their own truths. Many said her story helped them understand that leaving a relationship doesn't mean you failed. It can mean you finally learned to love yourself enough to seek peace. Toni has mentioned in interviews that the process of writing was deeply emotional. There were moments when she cried over the pages, reliving painful memories. Yet she also felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time in decades, she no longer had to pretend. That truth, she said, was the beginning of healing. In sharing her pain, Toni transformed her personal struggles into a message of strength and empowerment. Even after all the personal challenges she endured, Toni's place in music history remains undeniable. The 1970s and early 1980s were golden years for Captain Tennille, and their songs captured the mood of an entire generation. Love Will Keep Us Together wasn't just a catchy tune. It became an anthem of hope and unity, symbolizing the optimism of the era. Their follow-up hits like Do That to Me, One More Time, Muskrat Love, and Shop Around further cemented their reputation as America's sweethearts. Toni's clear, heartfelt vocals combined with Daryl Dragon's musical arrangements created a sound that was both comforting and joyful. Their television variety show also helped them reach millions of homes across the country, where families gathered around the TV to watch their wholesome performances and gentle humor. While many pop acts faded with time, Captain Tennille left behind something lasting, music that still makes people smile decades later. Even today, their songs are played at weddings, parties, and reunions, reminding listeners of simpler, happier times. For Toni, that's one of the greatest rewards. Knowing her music became part of people's most precious memories. It's a legacy she carries proudly, even as she reflects on the personal pain that once hid behind those cheerful melodies. What truly makes Toni Tennille remarkable is not just her talent, but her grace in how she has handled life's ups and downs. Many people, after experiencing heartbreak or disappointment, might become bitter or withdrawn. Toni chose a different path. Instead of resentment, she found compassion, both for herself and for Daryl Dragon. Even though their marriage ended, she continued to speak about him with respect and kindness. She often described him as a brilliant musician and acknowledged that his emotional struggles were likely rooted in things beyond his control. When he fell ill, she was there, not out of obligation, but out of genuine care. That kind of compassion speaks volumes about her character. In interviews, Toni has said that she doesn't regret her life with Daryl. He was part of my journey, she explained, and he helped make me who I am. Her story is a powerful reminder that strength doesn't always mean fighting or winning. Sometimes it means forgiving, letting go, and continuing with dignity. Today, Toni is admired not only as a singer, but also as an example of emotional courage and maturity. Her ability to find peace after so many trials is what makes her story truly inspiring. In her later years, Toni Tennille found joy in sharing her experiences with others, especially younger musicians. She has often been invited to speak at music programs and local events in Arizona, where she offers advice drawn from a lifetime in the industry. Her message to aspiring artists is simple but profound. Never lose your love for the music itself. She emphasizes that fame and success are fleeting, but genuine passion will carry you through every hardship. Toni has also become a quiet advocate for emotional awareness, encouraging people to talk openly about their feelings, their struggles, and their need for connection. She believes that the entertainment industry, while glamorous on the surface, can be very lonely behind the scenes. By sharing her story, she hopes to remind others that it's okay to ask for help and to value one's emotional health as much as one's career. In Prescott, Toni has also participated in local theater productions and community projects, enjoying the simple pleasure of performing without the glare of Hollywood lights. These small but meaningful contributions have allowed her to stay connected to her roots and continue spreading joy through her art. Even after so many years, Toni Tennille continues to receive love and appreciation from fans around the world. Many of them grew up listening to her songs, while younger